ladies and gentlemen. Our next guest is an award-winning international journalist, educator, author, speaker, investor, nationally syndicated radio host, consultant. He is a president of Liberty Sentinel Media and also a senior editor for a New American Magazine and a writer for WorldNet Daily. Let's say hello to Alex Newman, who joins us here on the Ringside Politics program. Hey, Alex, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Yes, great to have you. Before I get into some of the issues I wanted to talk to you about, you just got back from this UN conference. Please share with us about that. It didn't get much media coverage, so give us a scoop, Alex.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate it. This is a huge story. In fact, it's one of the most important stories, I believe, at the moment. And you're right. The media just completely ignored this. But so the UN, every year they have a climate conference. This year they met in Baku, Azerbaijan. I try to go to them every year because this is such a significant issue. In fact, the climate scam, I would argue, underpins all the other scams, right? The economic transformation, the destruction of our energy infrastructure, all of this nonsense that we're seeing. And so at this summit, every government in the world, all of the UN's member states, very much including the Biden administration, agreed for the first time ever on the rules for the global carbon markets that they're setting up. Yes, they're still planning to tax you and charge you for CO2, which is the gas that you exhale. They also agreed to $1.3 trillion annually in wealth redistribution by 2035, mostly coming from the American middle class and going to third world kleptocracies. So this was a hugely significant meeting. They agreed that they're going to be updating their international standardized academic test to include what they call climate literacy, which means can you regurgitate the climate change propaganda that humans are bad, babies are bad, pets are bad, cars are bad, energy is bad, unless it's in China, in which case it's all good. And if you can do that well, you'll look like a good student. If you can't, then you look bad. So this is the tip of the iceberg, Jeff.
Alex, this is so ridiculous. So Trump's getting in there in a few days. Can we get out of whatever conference this is so that we don't participate in this, get out of the Paris Climate Accord, get out of all these, World Trade Organization, World Health Organization, all these different international groups that always seem to do what you said, put the bill on the American middle class. So Can we do that where it doesn't matter to us what these idiots come up with?
Yeah, we certainly can do that, Jeff. And, at the New American, we've been advocating for that since I've been on this planet, since 1985, to get out of these things. And Donald Trump made a really, really good start during his first term. He did get us out of the WHO. He got us out of UNESCO, the UN's education agency. He did file the announcement that we're going to get out of the Paris Agreement. But, of course, the clowns who oversee this said, well, it takes 4 years to get out of it. So after the election, then we'll make this official. And, of course, the election came. Biden got us right back in, so we're still in. But I was speaking with some of the key people at Trump's EPA from the first term, and they have a new plan for this time around. Instead of just trying to get out of the Paris Agreement, they're talking about withdrawing entirely from what's called the UNFCCC, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. This is the underlying treaty that supposedly, there's some questions about whether it was legitimate, but this was supposedly ratified by our U.S. Senate in the 1990s. And that is what all of the other climate shenanigans are built on. So if they were to get us out of that, the whole climate fraud would disappear. But I will caution people, Jeff, there's a lot of people, maybe not the majority, but there's quite a few key people in the incoming Trump administration who have expressed at least a friendliness to this agenda. Trump has spoken very clearly it's a fraud, it's a scam, but there are some people near him who don't agree. So
here's what and of course this isn't going to happen, but I'd love to see us get out of the United Nations.
Absolutely.
I'd love to see us get out of all these international organizations. I mean, he got elected on a platform of America First, making America great again. It wasn't about making international organizations great again, making America great again. And these international organizations, as you know, Alex, you've studied this, they just soak American taxpayers. It's all on our backs. And, all these other countries like China and India, they get a pass and they get preferential treatment, but we get the bill. So why are we in them?
It's a very good question. I would argue that we're in them primarily because the establishment wants to continue surrendering American sovereignty and merging us into this crazy one world political economic structure that they are talking about building. And they talk about this pretty openly. Back since the 90s, they've been saying the New World Order. But Trump's instincts have always and everywhere been opposed to this agenda. He has spoken repeatedly about the dangers of globalism. He's talked about the UN being an enemy to the United States. He's absolutely right. And here's what's really interesting about this, Jeff. we may have the first real opportunity to get out of the UN since the UN was created in the aftermath of World War II. We actually have matching bills in the House and in the Senate right now, and I'm sure they'll be reintroduced in the next Congress, that will essentially get us out of the UN, stop all the funding, get us out of all the UN agencies, and evict their headquarters from New York City. It's called the Defund Act. It was introduced by Senator Mike Lee on the Senate side, and we've got more and more people, very prominent people, Rand Paul, Nikki Haley, talking about maybe it is time for us to leave this thing.
Well, I'm certainly on board with that, and I think I think the majority of Americans would be on board with that. Now, let's talk about something that you have discussed, and that is Greenland, Canada, Panama Canal, the discussions that we've heard from President Trump about these topics. We didn't hear about them during the campaign, but they've been coming up now in the transition. What do you make of these issues that you've been hearing a lot about in recent days?
Well, this is a really tricky issue. So on the one hand, there's an obvious geopolitical strategic element here to being able to utilize Greenland for military purposes, for commercial purposes. And, of course, the same is true for the Panama Canal. And that is critical. The United States has to protect its national security. We've got Russia. We've got China. We've got BRICS. We've got all these troubling alliances, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, all these different groupings that are coming together against the United States. So from that perspective, I do think this is important. But there's another sense in which I think this is really dangerous, Jeff, and not a lot of people have followed this very closely. But going back 20 or 30 years, a group of globalists hatched this plan to create what they themselves described as a North American community, leading eventually to a North American Union. And during the Bush administration, George W. Bush administration, they had plans. So Paul Cellucci, ambassador to Canada, we got the documents that were leaked by WikiLeaks, to undermine sovereignty, to eventually create a North American parliament, a North American currency, very much along the lines of what they did with the European Union, what Putin is doing with the Eurasian Union, what the South Americans are doing with the Union of South American States. And so that is a really, really significant danger. NAFTA was kind of the starting point for that. Unfortunately, the USMCA built on that. And so I think we need to be very careful. Trump's instincts have always been correct. We want bilateral agreements with governments, not these multilateral international institutions. So there's a double-edged sword here. Some of these things are good and important, but we have to watch out for globalists trying to mislead or manipulate Trump.
I could not agree with you more, and I'm glad you're sounding the alarm about it. We're doing it here on this program. Alex, look forward to having you back on. Thank you for your great work. And that's Alex Newman right here on the Ringside Politics.